The boy handed a gift to the bricklayer, and he stopped work to cry. David Johnson had worked in construction for 15 years and was known for never talking to anyone on the job site. Every day, he arrived promptly at 7 in the morning, greeted others with just a nod, and focused on his tasks until the end of his shift. It was on a Tuesday morning that everything changed. A boy of about 8, wearing a faded blue t-shirt, appeared at the entrance of the construction site, holding a small box wrapped in red gift paper. The security guards tried to stop him from entering, but he shouted that he needed to deliver something very important to the man with the yellow helmet. David was laying bricks on the second floor when he heard the commotion below. He looked through the windowless frame and saw the boy pointing in his direction. The foreman, Mr. Frank, climbed the stairs, huffing with anger. "David, there's a kid down here who wants to talk to you. What's this about? Do you know this boy?" "I don't know anyone," David replied without stopping his work. "Tell him to leave." But the boy didn't give up. He managed to convince the guard to let him go up, claiming it was very urgent. When he appeared on the second floor, David finally stopped what he was doing and turned to him. "What do you want, kid?" "I brought this for you," the boy said, holding out the little box with both hands. "My grandma said that when we care about someone, we should show it." David looked around, embarrassed. The other bricklayers had stopped to watch the scene. He reluctantly took the box, thinking of getting rid of it quickly. When he opened the gift, his hands began to tremble. Inside was a small toy helmet, yellow, identical to the one he wore, just in miniature. Along with it was a crayon drawing of a helmeted man building a house, and below, in a child's uneven handwriting, it read, "For the uncle who builds pretty houses." The tears David had held back for years finally fell. He sat on the dusty floor, still holding the gift, as sobs from deep within overtook him. The boy stepped closer and placed his small hand on David's shoulder. "You didn't like it?" he asked worriedly. "I loved it," David managed to say between sobs. Really loved it. What no one knew was that David carried a pain that had followed him for 5 years. He had a son the same age as that boy, named Michael, who lived with his ex-wife in Chicago. Since the messy divorce, David hadn't been able to see the boy. His mother had moved away and cut off all contact, claiming he prioritized work too much and didn't pay attention to his family. The gift from that unknown boy stirred wounds David tried to forget every day. The toy helmet reminded him of the Sundays he spent playing with Michael, building little houses with wooden blocks. "How did you know where I work?" David asked, wiping his eyes. "I live over there." The boy pointed to a low building across the street. "I watch you from my grandma's bedroom window. Every day you come early and keep working. My grandma said you look really lonely." "And what's your name?" "Jimmy. But everyone just calls me Jimmy. And my grandma is Mrs. Margaret." David smiled for the first time in months. What a curious coincidence that a boy named Jimmy would take an interest in a bricklayer. "And why did you want to give me a gift, Jimmy?" "Because you always seem sad. My grandma said when we see someone sad, we should do something to help. So I thought of the gift." Mr. Frank appeared on the floor, visibly annoyed by the work stoppage. "David, what's this nonsense? Everyone stopped working because of some kid. Get back to work now." "Leave the man alone," said Jimmy, stepping in front of David. "He's just looking at my present." The other construction workers started laughing at the situation. It was funny to see a kid defending David, who had a reputation for being grumpy and hard to deal with. "Listen here, kid." Mr. Frank crouched down to Jimmy's height. "This is a workplace, not a playground. Go on home. You've already caused enough trouble." "I'm not leaving," said Jimmy, crossing his little arms. "I came to visit my friend and I haven't finished talking to him yet." David stood up slowly, still moved, and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "It's fine, Frank. It was just a minute. I'll get back to work now." "Well, you better, and this boy needs to leave right now. It's dangerous for him to be on the site." "I know," said David. "Jimmy, thank you for the present. It's the nicest one I've ever gotten. But the man's right. This place isn't safe for you." "Can I come back tomorrow?" Jimmy asked, his eyes shining. "You can," David smiled. "But stay down there, okay?" "Okay." Jimmy ran down the stairs, waving at David from the window. When the boy was out of sight, David carefully tucked the gift into his tool bag. "What a strange thing," remarked Mark, the construction worker next to him. "I've never seen you talk so much." "Me neither," David agreed, returning to work. But now there was something different about him. He seemed lighter, less tense. The next day, Jimmy showed up right at lunchtime. He stayed outside the construction site, sitting on a low wall someone had built nearby. David went down to talk to him. "Hey, Jimmy, came to visit me again?" "Yep, and I brought you this." He held up a small lunchbox. "Grandma made coccinas and said workers need to eat well." David was touched by the gesture. It had been years since anyone had cared for him like that. He opened the lunchbox and found 3 warm, well-seasoned coccinas. "Your grandma cooks really well. She made them special for you. You can eat them all. We've got more at home." As David savored the coccinas, Jimmy started talking about his life. He'd lived with his grandma since he was 5. His parents worked in another city and only visited occasionally. "Grandma says they went looking for work far away, but one day they'll come back for us." David felt a pang in his heart. He knew that situation all too well, families separated by work. It was exactly what had happened to him. "And you like living with your grandma?" "Yeah. She's really good to me. But sometimes I get sad because I miss my parents." "I understand," David said softly. "Do you have kids?" The question caught David off guard. He stayed silent for a few seconds, fighting back emotion. "I do. A boy about your age." "Where is he?" "Lives far from here, with his mother." "Don't you visit him?" "It's complicated, Jimmy. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes and then it's hard to fix things." Jimmy thought for a moment. "My grandma always says there's nothing that can't be fixed with talking and a really sincere apology." David smiled sadly. If only it were that simple. "Your grandma's a wise woman. She wants to meet you. Said anyone I like she wants to like too." "Maybe someday." David stood up. "I've got to get back to work now." "Can I come again tomorrow?" "Sure, but only at lunchtime, okay?" This routine repeated all week. Jimmy showed up every day at lunch, always with something special his grandma had made. David began looking forward to these moments. Those 15 minutes of conversation seemed to brighten his whole day. The other workers watched the friendship with curiosity. David was different, more talkative, even cracking a few jokes during work. "Looks like that boy worked magic on David," Mark commented to Steve, another worker from the crew. "True? I've never seen him smile so much." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. On Friday, Jimmy arrived earlier than usual, even before lunchtime. David was working when he heard someone calling his name from below. He looked down and saw not only Jimmy, but also a gray-haired lady who must have been the famous grandmother. "David!" Jimmy shouted. "I want you to meet my grandma." David went down to greet Mrs. Margaret. She was a woman in her 60s, petite, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Pleasure to meet you, David. I'm Margaret. I've heard so much about you." "I wonder what this boy's been saying," David laughed. "Only good things. He never stops talking about you. David this, David that. He even dreams about you." "Grandma!" Jimmy turned red. "It's true. The other day he woke up saying he dreamed you came over for dinner." David was moved by that innocent confession. Seeing how much he meant to Jimmy touched him deeply. "So I came here to make an official invitation," Mrs. Margaret continued. "How about joining us for dinner on Sunday? I'll make the best feijoada you've ever had." David hesitated. It had been so long since he'd visited anyone's home. He'd grown used to solitude and wasn't sure he was ready for such closeness. "I don't know if it's a good idea." "Of course it is." Jimmy grabbed his hand. "We can play after dinner." "Come on, David," Mrs. Margaret insisted. "No one should be alone on Sunday, and from what I see, you need a family, even if it's just borrowed." The woman's words struck a chord in David's heart. That was exactly what he missed. A family, a place to belong. "All right," he finally said. "I'll come." "Yay!" Jimmy jumped with joy. "I'll show you all my toys." "Then it's settled," said Mrs. Margaret. Sunday noon, apartment 204. Apartment. It's the blue building right across the way. When he returned to work, David had a smile on his face he couldn't hide. Mr. Frank noticed the change. What's all this happiness, David? Oh, nothing. Just feeling good. Does it have to do with that boy? Maybe. Look, David, you've been working well, but you can't let this distract you from the job. Work is work. It won't be a problem, Frank, don't worry. But Mr. Frank wasn't convinced. He'd noticed David seemed more distracted lately, always glancing toward the building where Jimmy lived. He decided to keep an eye on the situation. Sunday came, and David dressed in his best. He bought a cake from the bakery and some flowers for Mrs. Margaret. When he arrived at the apartment, he was welcomed like a long-lost relative. The home was simple, but very cozy. Photographs were scattered around the living room, showing Jimmy at different ages, always beside his grandmother. David noticed none of the pictures included the boy's parents. "Sit down, David," said Mrs. Margaret. "The feijoada is almost ready." Jimmy came running in wearing a clean shirt and his hair neatly combed. "David, you really came?" "Of course I did. I promised, didn't I?" During lunch, David learned more about Jimmy's life. His parents had gone to work on a farm in rural Montana and promised to come back for him once they were settled. That was 3 years ago. "And do they send news?" David asked. "Every now and then," Mrs. Margaret replied, "but less and less. The last letter came 4 months ago." David noticed the hidden sadness in the woman's voice. She was raising her grandson alone, with little means but plenty of love. "And what about you, David?" Mrs. Margaret changed the subject. "Jimmy told me you have a son." David swallowed hard. He hadn't expected the topic to come up. "I do. Michael. He's 8, same as Jimmy." "And where is he?" "In Chicago." "With his mother? It must be hard being away from him." "Yeah," David lowered his eyes. "Very hard." Jimmy, who had been listening intently, moved closer to David. "Why don't you go visit him?" "Like I said before, Jimmy, sometimes adults mess up, and then it's hard to fix things." "But if you say sorry..." "It's not just about saying sorry. There's more to it." Mrs. Margaret noticed David's discomfort and changed the subject. But Jimmy remained thoughtful for the rest of lunch. After eating, Jimmy took David to see his room. It was small but covered in drawings taped to the wall. Most showed him and his grandmother, but David noticed several new drawings of a man in a helmet. "These are you," Jimmy said proudly. "You draw really well." "My teacher says I have a talent for art." David studied the drawings carefully. In every one, the helmeted man was smiling. That's how Jimmy saw him, so different from the scowling image David had of himself. "Jimmy, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why did you want to be my friend? I'm a grumpy man who doesn't talk to anyone." Jimmy thought for a moment before answering. "Because you looked like you needed a friend. And my grandma always says, if you can help someone, you should. But you're just a kid. I should be helping you, not the other way around." "It doesn't matter who helps who," Jimmy said with the wisdom only children possess. "What matters is that we help each other." David was moved by the simplicity and truth of those words. He hugged Jimmy gently. "Thank you for being my friend, Jimmy. Thank you for letting me." When David left that afternoon, he felt something he hadn't in years, like he belonged somewhere. That simple home with that kind grandmother and that special boy had become a refuge for his wounded soul. On Monday, he returned to work with a different energy. He greeted all his co-workers, something he never did, and even hummed while working. "David's really changed," Mark remarked. "Seems like a different person." But not everything would stay easy. Mid-morning, Mr. Frank got a call that changed everything. It was from the construction company owner, Mr. Richard, saying he'd be making a surprise inspection. "Listen up," Mr. Frank shouted. "The boss is coming. I want everyone working properly. No chatting, no slacking." David didn't pay much attention to the warning. He was focused on his work when, at lunchtime, he saw Jimmy arriving with his usual lunchbox. "David," the boy called, "I brought chicken pie today." David waved and went down to meet him as usual. But this time, Mr. Richard was arriving with Mr. Frank, just as David approached the gate to talk to Jimmy. "What's this, Frank?" Mr. Richard asked. "Why is there a child on the worksite?" "It's a bit complicated, boss," Mr. Frank stammered. "The boy comes here every day to talk to David." "David?" Mr. Richard looked toward the laborer. "Do you know this child?" David walked over nervously. Mr. Richard was known for being strict about rules. "Yes, sir. This is Jimmy. He lives across the way." "And what's he doing here every day?" He only comes to bring me food that his grandma makes," David tried to explain. "He doesn't get in the way of work." "Doesn't get in the way?" Mr. Richard raised his voice. "Kids don't belong near a construction site. It's dangerous and could cause trouble for the company." Jimmy hid behind David, frightened by the scolding. "I'm sorry, sir," David said. "It won't happen again." "I sure hope not," Mr. Richard replied. "And you, boy, can't come here anymore. It's too dangerous." "But I just want to give food to my friend," Jimmy said in a small voice. "It doesn't matter. This isn't a place for kids." David's heart ached seeing Jimmy sad and scared. The boy didn't deserve to be treated like that. "Excuse me, sir," David said to Mr. Richard. "The boy never stepped onto the site. He only stayed outside. I never let him interfere with work." "It doesn't matter, David. Rules exist for a reason. And another thing," Mr. Richard turned to Mr. Frank, "why do you allow these situations? You're in charge here." Mr. Frank turned red. He knew if he didn't take drastic action, he could lose his job. "Listen, David," Mr. Frank said firmly. "If that boy shows up here again, you're fired. Understood?" David felt like he'd been punched in the gut. He needed that job, but he couldn't stand the thought of hurting Jimmy. "I understand," he said quietly. Jimmy started crying. "Don't cry, Jimmy." David crouched down to his level. "We'll see each other later, okay?" "When?" I'll come to your house again on Sunday." "Promise?" "I promise." Jimmy walked away with his head down, still holding the lunchbox David hadn't even had time to take. Mr. Richard and Mr. Frank went back to their inspection, leaving David alone with his anguish. The rest of the week was terrible for David. He didn't see Jimmy, didn't get Mrs. Margaret's lovingly made food anymore, and felt guilty for causing the whole situation. His co-workers noticed he'd gone back to his old grumpy self. When Sunday came, David went to Mrs. Margaret's house with a heavy heart. He needed to explain what had happened. Jimmy opened the door already crying. "David, I thought you didn't want to be my friend anymore." "Of course I'm still your friend, Jimmy. It's just, things will be different now." Mrs. Margaret appeared in the living room, sensing something was wrong. "What happened, David?" He told her everything. How the boss had forbidden Jimmy from coming to the site, and how Mr. Frank had threatened to fire him if the boy returned. "I understand," Mrs. Margaret said sadly. "Work is work." "But I don't want to stop seeing you," David said. "If you'll let me, I'll come here every Sunday." "Of course you can come," Jimmy exclaimed. "Every Sunday, every Sunday." But David knew it wasn't the same. Those daily meetings, those few minutes at lunch that brightened his days, were gone. And the worst part? It was his fault for not handling things better. The following week was one of the hardest in David's life. He went back to his old isolation, eating alone, barely talking to anyone. Jimmy showed up at the site twice but only watched from afar, never coming close. Then, on a Wednesday, everything changed again. David was working when he heard a terrible crash outside. Looking out the window, he saw a car had crashed right in front of the building where Jimmy lived. Without thinking twice, David dropped his tools and ran downstairs. When he reached the street, a crowd had already gathered around the accident. His heart nearly stopped when he heard someone shout, "There's a child hurt!" David pushed through the crowd toward the crash. When he got close, he saw Jimmy on the ground, conscious but crying, with a cut on his forehead. "Jimmy!" David knelt beside him. "David!" Jimmy tried to get up. "I was on my way to see you, but the car—" "Easy, easy, don't try to move." Mrs. Margaret came running, frantic. "My grandson. What happened to my grandson?" "He was crossing the street when the car lost control," explained a witness. "He managed to avoid the crash, but he fell and hit his head on the curb." "We need to get him to the hospital," said David. "We've already called an ambulance," someone in the crowd said. David held Jimmy's hand until the ambulance arrived. The boy was scared but didn't seem seriously hurt. "David, don't leave me," said Jimmy. "I won't leave you, no. I'll go to the hospital with you." "But what about your job?" asked Mrs. Margaret. "To hell with the job," David said without hesitation. In the ambulance on the way to the hospital, David held tight to Jimmy's and Mrs. Margaret's hands. At that moment, he knew for sure that these two people were the family he had chosen to have. At the hospital, they found out Jimmy only had a superficial cut and a big scare. Nothing serious. But that accident made David reflect on life's priorities. When they left the hospital, it was already late afternoon. David had missed a whole day of work. He knew he'd have to explain his absence to Mr. Frank the next day. "David," Mrs. Margaret said as they walked home, "thank you for staying with us today. I know you might have trouble at work." "Mrs. Margaret, today I learned something important. You two are my family now, and family is something you never abandon." Jimmy, walking between them, took David's hand. "You're like a father to me, David." Those words touched David deeply. That was exactly how he felt, as if Jimmy were his son. The next day, David arrived at the construction site knowing he'd have to face the consequences. Mr. Frank called him in before he even started working. "David, where were you yesterday? You didn't show up without notice." "Jimmy had an accident. I had to take him to the hospital." David, Mr. Frank shook his head. "I told you this would cause trouble. Now you're getting too involved with that family." "Frank, they're important to me. But I also have to think about the job. I can't have employees missing work without warning. It won't happen again." "I hope not, because if it does, you know what the consequences will be." David went back to work worried. He knew he was in a tough spot. He needed the job, but he couldn't imagine life without Jimmy and Mrs. Margaret anymore. During lunch break, since he couldn't meet Jimmy at the site anymore, he decided to stop by their house quickly. He found Jimmy with a bandage on his forehead but in good spirits. "David, you came. I came to see how you're doing." "I'm fine. Grandma said it was just a scare." "That's good. I was worried all night." Mrs. Margaret appeared in the living room with a serious expression. "David, we need to talk." They sat at the kitchen table while Jimmy went to play in his room. "David, I noticed something yesterday at the hospital. You look at Jimmy as if he were your son." David lowered his eyes, unsure how to respond. "And he looks at you the same way," Mrs. Margaret continued, "as if you were the father he never had." "Mrs. Margaret, Let me finish. I know you suffer being away from your son, and I know Jimmy suffers not having his parents around. You two are filling a void for each other." David stayed silent, knowing she was right. "But I worry about one thing," said Mrs. Margaret. "What if Jimmy's parents come back? What if you reconcile with your son? What will happen to this bond between you?" It was a question David didn't want to face, but one that needed to be asked. "I don't know, Mrs. Margaret. All I know is that now I can't imagine my life without you all." "David, have you really tried to contact your son?" "Yes, many times. But his mother won't allow it." "What if you went to Chicago in person?" "I've thought about that, but I'm afraid of causing even more problems. Sometimes we need to take some risks to fix the important things." That night, David kept thinking about Mrs. Margaret's words. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was time to try once more with Michael. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now continuing. On Friday, David made a decision. He asked Mr. Frank for time off the following Monday, citing urgent personal matters. He didn't mention he was going to try to see Michael to avoid raising expectations. On Sunday, during lunch at Mrs. Margaret's house, David shared his plans. "I'm going to try to see my son on Monday," he said nervously. "That's wonderful," exclaimed Jimmy. "Are you bringing him to meet us?" "Easy, Jimmy. I don't even know if I'll get to talk to him." "You will," said Mrs. Margaret. "And you know why? Because now you're a different man. Jimmy taught you how to be a father again." David looked at Jimmy, who was focused on his drawing. It was true. That boy had awakened paternal feelings in him that had been dormant. The tenderness, the patience, the desire to protect and care. "David," Jimmy looked up from his drawing, "if your son doesn't want to be your friend, you can tell him he has to. Because fathers and sons should always be friends." "You're right, Jimmy." On Monday, David took the first bus to Chicago. During the 4-hour trip, he kept thinking about what he would say to Michael, how he would approach him after so long. Arriving in Chicago, he went straight to the school where he knew Michael studied. He waited outside, nervous, until the dismissal bell rang. When he saw Michael leaving the school, David's heart nearly stopped. The boy had grown so much in recent years. He was taller, thinner, but still had the same face David carried in his memory. David approached slowly, unsure how to act. "Michael." The boy turned and froze, unresponsive. For a few seconds, father and son stared at each other in silence. "Dad," Michael finally said. "Hi, son. What are you doing here?" "I came to see you. I missed you." Michael looked around, as if searching for someone. "Your mother isn't here," David said. "I came alone." "She won't like knowing you came." "I know, but I needed to see you." Michael didn't know what to do. David realized the boy was confused and scared. "Michael, can you talk with me for a few minutes? There's a diner right on the corner." "I don't know. Mom told me not to talk to you." "Please, son, just 5 minutes." Michael hesitated, but finally agreed. They walked to the diner in silence. David ordered a soda for his son and coffee for himself. "How are you, Michael?" "Fine," the boy replied without meeting his father's eyes. "And school? Do you like it?" "It's okay." David realized this wasn't going to be easy. Michael was clearly uncomfortable and distant. "Son, I know I did a lot of things wrong. I know I hurt you and your mother." Michael remained silent. "But I want you to know I never stopped thinking about you, not for a single day." "Then why didn't you ever come see me before?" Michael's question caught David off guard. "Your mother wouldn't allow it. She moved and didn't give me any updates." "But you could have tried harder." David realized Michael was right. He had given in to the situation too easily. He could have fought harder to stay in touch with his son. "You're right, Michael. I should have insisted more. I should have chased after you." "Why didn't you?" "Because I was a very sad and bitter man. I thought you were better off without me." "But I missed you," Michael said softly. Those words touched David's heart deeply. His son had also suffered from the separation. "I missed you too, every single day. Mom said you only cared about work, that you didn't care about us." "That's not true, Michael. I worked so hard because I wanted to give you a good life, but I ended up overdoing it and neglecting my family. And now? Are you still the same?" David thought of Jimmy, how that boy had changed his life. "No, son. Now, I've learned that family is more important than any job." "How did you learn that?" David told Michael about Jimmy, how a stranger had come into his life, how they'd become friends, how that child had awakened in him the desire to be a father again. "So, you have another son now?" Michael asked with a hint of jealousy. "No, Michael. Jimmy isn't my son. He's a very special friend who taught me some important things about being a father, but you're my only son." "What if I wanted you to be my dad again?" Michael's question moved David deeply. "I'd be the happiest father in the world." "But how?" "Mom won't let you live with us again." "It doesn't have to be like that, son. A father and son can love each other even if they live apart. I can visit you. We can talk on the phone. You can come see me." "You really want me to visit you?" "Of course I do. And there's more. I want you to meet Jimmy and Mrs. Margaret. They're a very special family." "Would they like to meet me?" "Absolutely. Jimmy already said any child of mine is a friend of his too." Michael smiled for the first time during their conversation. "He sounds cool." "He's very cool. He's your age and loves to draw. I like to draw too." "Really? What a coincidence." Father and son talked for another hour. David shared about his life now, his construction job, his friendship with Jimmy. Michael talked about school, his friends, his drawings. When it was time to say goodbye, they felt closer. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course, son. Can you call me sometimes so we can talk? I sure can. Do you have a number I can call? Michael wrote down his mom's cell number on a piece of paper and handed it to David. It's my mom's, but she lets me answer. What if she doesn't like me calling? I'll tell her it's important to me, that I need to talk to my dad. David hugged Michael tightly. It was a hug filled with 5 years of longing. I love you, son. I love you too, Dad. On the way home, David was emotional but happy. He'd taken the first step to win back his son. It wouldn't be easy, but now he had hope. When he got home, he went straight to Mrs. Margaret's to share the news. So? She asked eagerly. How did it go? David told her everything. Jimmy listened carefully, asking questions about Michael. Is he as handsome as you? The boy asked. Much handsomer than me, David laughed. When's he coming to meet us? I don't know yet, Jimmy. First I need to talk to him more, earn his trust again. But do you think he'll like me? I'm sure he will. How could anyone not like you? Jimmy smiled, satisfied. In the weeks that followed, David called Michael every Sunday. Their conversations grew longer and closer. Michael was talking about school and his friends, while David talked about work and Jimmy. One Sunday, Michael made a special request. Dad, can I talk to Jimmy? David was surprised but happy. Of course you can. Hold on, I'll call him. Jimmy got nervous when he heard he was going to talk to Michael. What am I supposed to say to him? Say anything. You two will get along. The conversation between the two boys was shy at first, but soon they were talking about cartoons, games, and school as if they'd been friends forever. I liked him, Jimmy said afterward. He seems really nice. And he liked you too. He said he wants to meet you in person. Really? When? I don't know yet. Maybe during school break. Things were going well between David and Michael, but at work the situation was getting complicated. Mr. Frank was growing more impatient with David's distractions. David, you've been really unfocused lately, he said one Thursday. Seems like your head is somewhere else. Sorry, Frank, I'll concentrate more. You'd better, because Mr. Richard has been complaining about the job's productivity. David tried to push himself harder, but it was difficult. He was torn between the job he needed to keep and the family he'd found. Then, on a Monday, everything exploded. David was working when he saw Jimmy running across the street toward the construction site. The boy was crying and looked frantic. Without a second thought, David dropped everything and ran down to see what was happening. Jimmy, what's wrong? David! Jimmy threw himself into his arms. Grandma got sick. She's in the hospital. What? What happened? She was making lunch and suddenly collapsed. The neighbor called an ambulance. David felt the world spin. Mrs. Margaret was like a mother to him. He couldn't lose that special woman. Let's go to the hospital now, David said. But what about your job? Jimmy asked, still crying. To hell with the job. What matters now is your grandma. David went back to grab his things and let them know he was leaving. Mr. Frank exploded in anger. David, are you crazy? You can't just walk out in the middle of the workday like this. Jimmy's grandma is in the hospital. I have to go. David, this has gone too far. You're mixing things up. I'm not mixing anything up, Frank. These people are my family now. Your family? David, you've lost touch with reality. They're not your family. Yes, they are. And I'll take care of them no matter what. David, if you walk out now, you're fired. This is your last warning. David paused for a moment, weighing the decision. He needed that job to support himself, but he couldn't abandon Jimmy at a time like this. Then I'm fired, he finally said. David, don't be stupid. But David had already left, rushing out with Jimmy toward the hospital. At the hospital, they learned Mrs. Margaret had fainted from low blood pressure. Nothing serious, but she'd need to stay under observation for a few days. Mrs. Margaret, David said, holding her hand, how are you feeling? Better now that you're here, she replied weakly. Sorry for scaring you. Don't apologize. What matters is that you're okay. David, shouldn't you be at work? He hesitated before answering. I quit my job. What do you mean? I got fired because I left to take care of you. Mrs. Margaret looked very worried. David, you shouldn't have done that. How will you support yourself without work? Don't worry about that now. The important thing is for you to get better. But David was worried. Without a job, how would he help Mrs. Margaret and Jimmy if they needed it? That night, David called Michael as usual. He told them about Mrs. Margaret's situation and about losing his job. Dad, you did the right thing, said Michael. Family is more important. But now I'm out of work, son. You'll find another job. A good person like you always finds work. Michael's confidence gave David strength. His son had understood the importance of the decision he'd made. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like the video and especially to subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. In the following days, while Mrs. Margaret was in the hospital, David took care of Jimmy. He took the boy to visit his grandmother every day and made meals for him at home. David, Jimmy said one night, what if Grandma doesn't get better? She will, Jimmy. The doctors said she just needs rest. But what if she gets really sick? Who'll take care of me? David looked at the boy who had become so important in his life. I'll take care of you, Jimmy. Promise? I promise. At that moment, David knew he'd made a final decision. No matter what happened, he would always take care of Jimmy and Mrs. Margaret. Mrs. Margaret was discharged at the end of the week. She was better, but the doctors recommended rest and avoiding strain. How am I supposed to work like this? She asked worriedly. Mrs. Margaret cleaned houses to supplement her retirement income. You won't work for now, David said. I'll handle everything. But David, you're out of work too. I'll find another job, and in the meantime, I have some savings that can help us. David was serious. He decided to use his savings to support Mrs. Margaret and Jimmy until he found another job. The following week, David searched for work. He visited several construction sites but found nothing right away. The construction industry was going through a tough time in the city. Then, on Thursday, something unexpected happened. David was returning from another unsuccessful job search when he saw Mr. Richard, the owner of the construction company where he'd worked, standing in front of Jimmy's building. David, Mr. Richard called. What a coincidence running into you here. Good afternoon, Mr. Richard. I heard you were fired from my site. Yes, sir. Frank told me the whole story, about the boy, the family you took in. David tensed, unsure where this conversation was going. You know, David, I've been thinking about the situation and I wanted to ask you something. Did you really quit your job to take care of a child who isn't even your own? I did, sir, and I'd do it again if I had to. Mr. Richard was silent for a few seconds. How about showing me where this boy lives? I want to meet the family that could make a man give up his job. Surprised, David took Mr. Richard to the apartment. Jimmy and Mrs. Margaret were nervous about the unexpected visit. So you're the famous Jimmy, Mr. Richard said. Yes, Jimmy replied shyly. And you're his grandmother? Yes, sir. Margaret, she introduced herself nervously. Mr. Richard looked around the simple but very clean and organized apartment. He saw Jimmy's drawings taped to the wall, the small dining table neatly set with care. Mind if I sit for a bit? Of course, Mrs. Margaret said. Mr. Richard talked to Jimmy about his drawings, asked about school, about life with his grandmother. Then he spoke with Mrs. Margaret about what it was like raising her grandson alone. Finally, he turned to David. Now, David, explain to me how you got involved with this family. David told the whole story, from the first day Jimmy showed up at the construction site with his gift to the decision to quit his job for them. And you don't regret it? No, sir, not one bit. Mr. Richard grew thoughtful for a few minutes. You know, David, I have 3 sons, and I always wonder if, in a situation like this, they would do what you did. If they would drop everything to take care of someone who isn't even part of their family. Every child needs someone to care for them, said David. You're right. And David, can I make you an offer? David paid close attention. I'm starting a new construction project on the other side of town. I need a responsible foreman, someone I can trust completely. someone who puts people first. David couldn't believe what he was hearing. Are you offering me a job? Not just a job, I'm offering you a promotion to construction foreman. David was speechless. It was a better opportunity than he had ever dreamed of. But sir, why would you do this for me? Because today I met a very special family, and I met a man who has the values I look for in my employees, someone who always puts family first. David looked at Jimmy and Mrs. Margaret, who were just as surprised as he was. I accept, he finally said. Great. You start Monday, and David, this new site is closer to home. You'll be able to have lunch here every day. Jimmy couldn't contain himself and ran to hug David. Now you can have lunch with me every day again. Yes, I can, Jimmy. When Mr. Richard left, the three of them hugged, overcome with emotion. It was as if a miracle had happened. David, said Mrs. Margaret, you deserve all the good things happening to you. No, Mrs. Margaret, I'm the lucky one to have you in my life. That night, David called Michael with the news. Dad, that's so cool, now you're the boss. Yeah, son, and you know what's even better? I'll earn enough for you to come visit me during your break. Really? I can really come? Of course you can. I'll buy your bus ticket. And I'll get to meet Jimmy in person. You sure will, he's excited to meet you. The following weeks were an adjustment. David started his new job and discovered that being a foreman was challenging but rewarding. He had to coordinate a team of 10 men and make sure the project stayed on schedule. The best part was that every day he could have lunch with Jimmy and Mrs. Margaret. The routine they had lost was back, only better. David, Jimmy said one day, are you happier now? Much happier. Why? Because when you smile, it makes me happy too. David hugged the boy tenderly. It was amazing how this child could express such deep feelings so simply. Mrs. Margaret's health had also improved. With David helping with expenses, she didn't have to work as much and could take better care of herself. David, she said one afternoon, you've completely changed our lives. You're the ones who changed mine, Mrs. Margaret. Jimmy has never been happier. He loves you like you're his father. I love him like he's my son too. And will you still love him when your real son comes to live with you? It was a question David had asked himself many times. Of course I will. The heart has no limits, Mrs. Margaret. The more love we give, the more love we have to give. You're a wise man, David. When school break arrived, Michael finally got to visit his father. David went to pick him up at the bus station, as nervous as if it were their first meeting. When he saw his son step off the bus, David's heart raced. Michael was even taller and seemed more mature. Hi, Dad. Hi, son. They hugged tightly. It was the embrace of a father and son finally reunited. How was the trip? Good. I was eager to get here. And I was eager for you to arrive too. On the way home, David showed Michael around the city. When they arrived at Mrs. Margaret's apartment, Jimmy was waiting by the window. It's him! It's Michael! Jimmy shouted, running to the door. When Michael entered the apartment, he was welcomed like family. Mrs. Margaret hugged him as if he were a grandson she hadn't seen in years. Michael, I finally get to meet you. David talks about you so much. It's a pleasure, Mrs. Margaret. And this here is Jimmy, David said. The two boys stared at each other for a few seconds, shyly. Then Jimmy smiled and held out his hand. Hi, Michael, I'm Jimmy. Hi, Michael replied, shaking his hand. David told me a lot about you. Want to see my drawings? Sure. Within minutes, the two were in Jimmy's room talking about drawings and games as if they were brothers. David, Mrs. Margaret said softly, look how well they get along. It's really amazing. During the 2 weeks Michael stayed, the house became a celebration. The two boys played together, drew together, and David felt complete seeing his two sons having fun. Michael visited the construction site where David worked and was impressed seeing his father leading a team of men. Dad, you really became the boss. I sure did. And it all started because Jimmy gave me that gift. What gift? David showed Michael the small toy helmet he kept lovingly in his drawer. This is what changed my life. Michael took the helmet and examined it. It looks just like your real one. Yeah, and when Jimmy gave it to me, I cried for the first time in years. Why? Because it reminded me of you, of how I'd forgotten how to be a father. And now you know how to be a dad again? Now I do. You both taught me. On the last night before Michael returned to Chicago, the four of them had dinner together. David looked around the table and felt like the happiest man in the world. "David," Michael said, "can I say something?" "Of course, son. I wish we could be a real family, all four of us." "What do you mean?" "You, me, Jimmy, and Mrs. Margaret, all together." David was moved by his son's words. "That would be beautiful, Michael. But you live in Chicago with your mom. What if I asked her to let me live with you?" David wasn't expecting that question. "You really want to live with me?" "I do. Here I have a dad, a brother, and a grandma. There I only have mom, and she's always working. Michael, it would be wonderful to have you here, but your mom would never agree. Can I try talking to her?" "You can try, but don't get your hopes up too high, okay?" When Michael returned to Chicago, he promised to try convincing his mom to let him live with his dad. David felt hopeful, but tried not to get too excited to avoid disappointment. 2 weeks later, David got an unexpected call. It was Jennifer, his ex-wife. "David, we need to talk." "About what?" "About Michael. He won't stop saying he wants to live with you." David's heart raced. "Jennifer, Let me finish. At first I said no, but then I started thinking about the situation. The boy really does seem happier when he comes back from there, and I've been working so much I barely have time for him." David could hardly believe what he was hearing. "Jennifer, are you saying—" "I'm saying maybe it's better for Michael to live with you, at least during the week. On weekends he can come here." David was speechless. "David, you there?" "Yeah, I just can't believe what I'm hearing." "Well, believe it, but there are some conditions." "What?" "First, I want to meet this family you've put together. Second, he has to keep going to a good school. Third, if there's any problem, he comes back to me." "I agree to everything," David said without hesitation. "Then I'll bring him this weekend. For him to start school on Monday." When David hung up the phone, he could barely contain his joy. He ran to share the news with Jimmy and Mrs. Margaret. "Michael is going to live with us," Jimmy shouted. "He's going to be my real brother." "What wonderful news," said Mrs. Margaret. "Now our family will be complete." Over the weekend, Jennifer arrived with Michael. It was the first time David had seen his ex-wife since the separation. The meeting was cordial but tense. Jennifer met Jimmy and Mrs. Margaret and was impressed by the affection they showed Michael. "You really take care of him like he's family," she remarked. "To us he is family," said Mrs. Margaret. "And to me, Jimmy is like a son too," David added. Jennifer noticed David had changed a lot. He was more mature, more responsible, more caring. "David," she said as she was leaving, "take good care of our son. Don't worry. He'll be very happy here." "I know. I can see it in his eyes." When Jennifer left, the four of them sat in the living room to talk about the new life they were starting. "Now we're a real family," said Jimmy. "It's true," Michael agreed. "A different kind of family, but a family." "David," said Mrs. Margaret, who would have thought a simple child's gift would lead to all this. David looked at the two boys and at the woman who had become like a mother to him. "It was the best gift anyone ever gave me," he said emotionally, "because it wasn't just a toy helmet. It gave me a whole family." "And we gained a father and a grandson," said Mrs. Margaret. "Dad," said Michael, "can I see that helmet Jimmy gave you?" David went to get the little yellow helmet he kept so dearly. "Here it is." "Can I hold it?" "Of course." Michael carefully took the helmet. "Thank you, Jimmy," he said to his friend. "Why?" "For giving this to my dad. If you hadn't, I'd never have gotten him back." Jimmy smiled proudly. "I knew he'd like it. He was so sad and needed a friend." "And now we're a happy family," said Michael. The following months were an adjustment but filled with joy. Michael enrolled in a good school near home and settled in quickly. The two boys shared Jimmy's room and got along like real brothers. David was radiant. After years alone and bitter, he had a close, happy family. His work as a foreman was going well, and Mr. Richard always praised his dedication. David, Mr. Richard said during a site visit, "You're the best foreman I've ever had. The team's productivity has improved so much since you took over." "Thank you, boss. I'm doing my best. And I'm thinking of promoting you again. I need a supervisor for all my projects." David could hardly believe it. Another promotion, another chance to grow. At home, life was peaceful and happy. Mrs. Margaret cared for the boys as if they were her real grandsons. Michael and Jimmy studied together, played together, and sometimes fought like real brothers. "David," Mrs. Margaret said one evening, "have you ever stopped to think how much our lives have changed? I think about it every day. Who would have guessed it all started with a boy wanting to give a gift to a grumpy construction worker?" David laughed. "I really was grumpy, wasn't I?" "Yes, but Jimmy saw past that. He saw you had a good heart. Kids have that ability, don't they? To see things adults miss. They do. And thank you, David." "Thank you for what?" "For being part of our family. For caring for Jimmy so lovingly. I'm the one who should thank you. You saved me from an empty, meaningless life." 1 year after that first gift, David organized a special party. He invited all his co-workers, including Mr. Richard, to celebrate the family anniversary. "Everyone," David said, raising a toast, "exactly 1 year ago, a brave little boy approached a grumpy construction worker and changed his life forever." "And ours too," Jimmy added. "This party is to celebrate how sometimes the best things in life come from the simplest gestures," David continued. "A small gift given with love can transform an entire life." Mr. Richard stood up to speak. "David, when I first met you, you were a good worker, but a closed-off and unhappy man. Today, I see someone fulfilled, a devoted father and a natural leader. That transformation inspires me every day. Thank you, boss." "And speaking of that," Mr. Richard smiled, "I have a gift for you. David, officially, you're promoted to General Supervisor. And more than that, I'm making you a partner in a new construction company I'm starting." The room erupted in applause. David was speechless. "Boss, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. You've earned it. And I'm sure with you as a partner, our company will go far." That night, after everyone had left, the family gathered in the living room to talk about the news. "Dad," Michael said, "now you're a businessman." "It really is amazing," David agreed. "Who would have thought all this would happen?" "I knew," Jimmy said. "How so?" "From the first day I knew you were special. That's why I gave you the gift. Jimmy, you have a very wise heart for your age. My grandma always says children see with their hearts, not their eyes. Your grandmother is a very wise woman." 2 years later, David and Mr. Richard opened their new construction company. David was now a businessman, but he hadn't lost his humility or forgotten where he came from. The company's first project was building a daycare center in their neighborhood. David insisted it be something special, with plenty of space for children to play. "David," Jimmy said, watching the construction, "why did you want to build a daycare first?" "Because it was children who changed my life. I want to give back by making a beautiful place for them." "Can I help pick the colors?" "Of course. You and Michael will be my junior consultants." The daycare turned out beautiful, with colorful walls, a modern playground, and spacious, airy classrooms. At the grand opening, David made sure Jimmy cut the ribbon with him. "This daycare is dedicated to all the children brave enough to reach out to an adult who needs love," David said in his speech. Life was perfect for the family. Michael excelled in school and already talked about following in his father's footsteps in construction. Jimmy kept drawing and dreamed of becoming an architect. Mrs. Margaret had slowly become the grandmother David never had, caring for him with the same affection she gave the boys. "David," she asked one Sunday morning, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, Mrs. Margaret." "Do you ever think about your old life? Do you miss anything?" David thought for a moment. "No, Mrs. Margaret, I don't miss a thing. This life we have now is everything I ever wanted, but didn't know." "And if Jimmy hadn't shown up that day?" "I'd rather not think about that. I'd probably still be a bitter, lonely man." Fate is a funny thing, isn't it? Sometimes it uses an 8-year-old to change an adult's life. That's true. Jimmy was the angel I didn't know I was waiting for. That afternoon, David was in the backyard when Jimmy approached with a paper in his hand. "David, I made a new drawing. Let me see." The drawing showed 4 people holding hands in front of a house. Below it was written, "My family." "It's beautiful, Jimmy." "David, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If I wasn't your real son, would you still love me the same?" David knelt down to the boy's level and looked him in the eyes. "Jimmy, you are my real son. Not by blood, but by heart. And love from the heart is the strongest kind there is. So you'll never stop loving me?" "Never. Even when you grow up, even when you have your own children, you'll always be my special boy." Jimmy hugged David tightly. "I'll love you forever too." That night, David kept thinking about how life can change completely with a simple gesture. A brave boy, a humble gift, an open heart ready to receive love. It all started with a toy helmet and a child who saw beyond appearances, and it resulted in a united family, a successful career, and a life full of meaning. David picked up the small yellow helmet he kept in the drawer and smiled. That simple object was a symbol of one of the greatest transformations a human being can experience, the transformation of love. He carefully placed the helmet back in the drawer. There it would stay forever, reminding the whole family that life's greatest gifts don't come wrapped in pretty paper, but in the genuine warmth of a pure heart. And so David Johnson, the construction worker who once cried upon receiving a gift, lived happily ever after with his chosen family, proving that true love doesn't depend on blood ties but on the bonds of the heart. The end. And you, dear listener, what did you think of this touching story? Do you believe a simple act of kindness can completely transform lives? Tell us in the comments which part moved you the most and if you've ever experienced something similar. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other stories like this one.